Yeah, there is absolutely a lot coming together in the first few weeks of 2026. We're back with another Off the Record on the Rocks with my good friend, Mr. Ankarino Lara. It's post MLK Day. This is usually when the chaos, the swirl, the new narratives take hold. Man, are we coming out strong with everybody landing in Switzerland for Davos. Probably a lot warmer over on the West Coast. How's it on your side?
It's so good to see you and hear your voice. We didn't have the sunny winter that we normally had over Christmas and New Year's, but right now it's in the mid 70s. It's blue skies. It reminds me why it is that we pay property tax in Southern California, and it's great. And I love you're talking about the narratives because it's the Tuesday after MLK. The Congress is back, and just like clockwork, the volume of not just new narratives, but I will say there's a lot of old narratives that are being reintroduced with a slightly tweaked flavor. You know what I mean? Where it's something we heard about, but they're like, oh, but wait, now it has this other thing that maybe you weren't expecting. That to me is always it's like the but or the alsos of the narratives.
Well, which of those headlines are you getting at? I mean, is this market structure bill? Is this
It's all
Trump
of them.
Trying to take Greenland? Is this Michael Saylor buying more Bitcoin? I mean,
It's all of them.
You go down the thread, it does feel like everybody had their press release queued up for 9 a.m. on the first Tuesday after the third Monday, just in time for January 20th. It really feels like a groundswell, that pent up news and narrative and everyone driving their strategic initiative forward. Maybe with the exception of Brian Armstrong having to hit a little bit of a little U-turn breaky poo with the market structure bill. So we caught glimpses of this, I think, in the last couple of weeks. Maybe we covered it on the last episode, that the markup that was scheduled in the Senate committee had gotten delayed to, I believe, the 29th, and that puts Davos squarely in the center. So where does Brian Armstrong now have to show up? But now on the global stage, saber rattling on the global stage, how important a flight to safety. I've heard that narrative. Talk about dusting off an old magic trick, but flight to safety with investors feeling the temperature rise in 2026. I mean, there's a lot on the geopolitical front. We can talk about Nick Clegg to the rescue with the chief geopolitical officer. But stick with Brian Armstrong and Davos. What's your take on, he's got to now show up on the global stage and preach to the international audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of, he's in an unfortunate position representing United States interests without really, let's just say, having United States interests in mind at all times. So there's this interesting dichotomy because he is the darling, right? Let's all remind everyone. Brian Armstrong is the guy who looks like he's a hairless cat who came from the future. And he basically has this silver-tongued way of navigating both the good guy relationship with the SEC under the Biden administration. This was Gary Gensler, with the bad guy, Gary Gensler, SEC, being sued at the same time because of all their financial products that were under scrutiny by the SEC. That all goes away. New administration, new Fed chair, no new Fed chair, but new head of the SEC and CFTCs. And now it's like, hey, you're tracking stock, what you're doing, everything is great. And we, in fact, need you to go to other countries. Before he was in Switzerland, where was he? He was in South and Central America, if you recall. He's down there talking to countries that happen to have a lot of crypto exposure. We'll get to Venezuela in a second on that. But he was in Argentina, Argentina's economy, if you look at it recently, they went and took a bunch of loans, and suddenly things are, the value of the Argentine peso is double, right? So Armstrong has things under his belt where he's, quote, doing good. Put him in Davos. This guy thought that the whole market structure bill was going to be long behind him in the rear view, and he could just go to Davos and have some hot cocoa and like take photos against the nice Instagrammable mountains and the whole thing. But no. They're like, no, sir. your work isn't done. We need you to go and kind of sort of smokescreen, beta test, you call it whatever you need to call it, because we're going to go get Greenland. And when we start to go get Greenland, the entire EU is going to throw up their arms and go berserk. So we need you and everyone else there to kind of work through some of our policy. Let's like take some of those dinners and those cocktail hours, and let's figure out what our messaging is so that when we do get the market structure bill and there's going to be a Clarity Act, focus, that we can use that to our advantage as we need to make these other bigger non-crypto, non-financial moves under the auspices of what you and I always say. When you say the matter of national security, you already know that the fix is in. And I think that he, unfortunately, has to be that punching bag right now for Europe.
I called it saber rattling, but we're talking about the Brian Armstrong who's all about, DeFi products and blockchain solutions, but saber rattling in the tone of, yes, it feels like this emergency meeting in Switzerland of all places. Trump is showing up with an entourage of people, and Brian Armstrong is now on the ground faced with this withdrawing support from the crypto market structure bill last week, which forced the markup about specifically on the stablecoin yield restrictions. But we can set that aside. But that's the banks. That's the ABA, the American Banking Association, screaming that the retail banks will somehow not have competitive lending products because you can go get yield off of a blockchain based smart contract at a higher rate than you could, or a lower rate, whichever way you want to look at it, whether you're the bank or you're going to pay your retail bank, right? It depends on who you're paying. But yeah, this is the best headline here. This is from Decrypt. Coinbase CEO seeks, quote, win-win on market structure bill in Davos charm offensive. I mean, even the way he's pimped out there as charm offensive it's exactly right. Timing is everything. But it is January 20th. The old magic trick's getting dusted off. The narrative's still swirling. It's very clear. Wait a second. This was supposed to happen last week or next week, the 29th. Now we got to get through Davos first. We got to get more. Venezuela, Greenland. We need to really get out of NATO. We need to keep these wars on all these affronts. It's mass chaos. Where does that mass chaos peak? I mean, what do they say? Buy in May and go away. I don't know. As spring starts to hope eternal, whatever that phrase is, I feel like I've repeated it wrong a few times, but it makes me think that the narrative, hope springs eternal, there it is, that the narrative here is going to get stretched a little bit longer, but the focus through all the noise is that it's happening. And the New York Stock Exchange talk about having a press release queued up.
Yeah. And that
this morning
mirrors what you're saying. That physical battlefield and the many theaters of war, which creates enough confusion and chaos, enough complexity, distraction, all these things to keep everyone guessing across the world and to keep everyone occupied, right? It's sort of a classic strategy of the industrial military complex generally. The United States doesn't like to be in one place, they like to be in many places, right? And very few countries can do that. But the United States
decentralized.
A decentralized military. Now we're getting to it. So now if you look at the mirror, which is the financial battlefield that we, of course, say is going to be fought in the metaverse, we say this many times across many fronts. I look at the parallel fracturing, right? There is the one narrative of Michael Saylor, acquisition of Bitcoin, a Bitcoin treasury company that comes on the heels of this another narrative, which is we're still thinking about the digital Federal Reserve. Yes, we're in Davos right now with that gentleman whose name I can't pull out of my hat here, who is there talking about how the Scott Bassett, the seized $6 billion of Bitcoin is going to start this digital Bitcoin reserve for the United States government. So that narrative still, at least they're saying, is holding. And by the way,
just telling you what they're doing with it.
If we go into Venezuela and get some of that Bitcoin that we can just sort of probably seize because the custodian, Mr. Nicolas Maduro, isn't there to hold his thumb drives or his seed phrases. Let's add that to the mix. Okay, now I'll go to the third thing, the New York Stock Exchange, ready to go through their super unfortunately named holding company, which is literally, the acronym is ICE.
Oh my
It's the
gosh, yes.
Intercontinental Exchange, and they've invested $2 billion in Polymarket. And then the last fourth one is people saying that AI and the blockchain is literally going to be the future of saving banking. And then the last one that's on top of all of that still is, hey, stable coins. Some people think stable coins are literally the future of settling blockchain-based transactions. But then there's a whole bunch of people, going back to your ABA, who think stable coins are doing nothing but de-dollarizing the American greenback. And all 6 of those theaters of war I just mentioned probably have a physical counterpart in the real world where we've got either boots or drones flying around or walking around. It's very complex and very distracting.
Well inventoried. I mean, you really did just lay it out, and that's exactly right. I think that the battle will take place in the buys and sells of a 24/7 marketplace now called the New York Stock Exchange. I mean, that's the announcement that I sent to you, the NYSE officially announcing the launch of a 24/7, call it crypto-friendly marketplace. They make, the technology now enabling this in January of 2026, right after Martin Luther King Day, when new policies get enacted. Who's ready but ICE, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange? And that is crazy to think. The obfuscation of the narrative here is wild, because nobody, if you're not paying attention, who owns the NYSE, the NYSE, ICE is the parent company who is now facilitating this new 24/7 marketplace. The other one, when you mentioned Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, basically talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, he stated that the Washington administration, that's how he said it, the Washington administration has not backed down from its plan to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. He said that the U.S. wants to create the best regulatory regime, unquote, for digital assets. Now think about that war and think about that front, because something that we've talked about here on the podcast is that nobody exports regulation and compliance typically better than the EU. But guess what? Guess who's going to do it differently than what the EU did? Guess who's going to, let's say, fracture the timeline here and own the narrative and say, you know what, we're going to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve in America. We're going to have it, with Michael Saylor buying up 3% of the supply. And we're going to regulate the hell out of digital assets, so much so that it's going to overtake the real world, right? If you can regulate the digital twin through the New York Stock Exchange, then what else do you need?
I mean, that is grabbing the tail and shaking it and making the front of the dog wag, not up and down. And I think what also needs to not be lost here on our listeners is that when the New York Stock Exchange, through its holding company, the Intercontinental Exchange, which is, they shorten it to ICE, which again, purely coincidental, I'm sure, they are not just talking about saying, I'm going to get my Tesla shares and I'm going to buy my treasury bonds and my commodities futures. Like, those were CTFC. Sorry. I'm going to be buying my securities, my stocks, bonds, and so forth. And then I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. Like, that's not what they're saying. I mean, yes, there will be cryptocurrencies available there. But what we're talking about is, in this one little swoop, this one little twist, is turning a marketplace that how old is the stock exchange? It's 100 and how many years? I forget the number. It goes back 233
3-year-old exchange.
Out of date I am. 233 years. This battleship that can barely turn a tick or two when you turn the wheel. This massive institution. But with one little quick flip, there is a digital twin of the entire New York Stock Exchange. So what we're saying is, hey, you want to go and wave your papers down at Wall Street and scream, I want pork bellies, and scream, give me some more shares of Apple and Tesla, and you get your tickets and the whole thing. You can still do that. It's just open from, 8 to 4 or whatever. You can go down there. It's almost like a museum piece with automatons at Disneyland still waving their tickets and everyone's saying, look at them. Look at how they work. But then it closes. You go out through the gift shop, and then guess what? The lights go off, and you can still buy the Apple and the Tesla and the Facebook or Meta, because now there's a tokenized version of every stock on the blockchain. They just turned the NYSE not only into a 24/7 casino in the sense that you can buy and sell at any time of the day, but also now add into your portfolio of your K some nice stocks, some nice cryptocurrencies, and how about just some predictive bets, like who will be the next dictator deposed? Let's just throw that one into my Roth IRA.
Let me read
I can make
a
money
little
off
bit
of
here.
Yeah, please read.
Let me read. This is from Alexander Osipovich. This is from this morning in the Wall Street Journal. NYSE to launch 24/7 trading platform for blockchain-based securities. Big Board joins other Wall Street firms in tokenization push. And my favorite quote, the NYSE said it would seek regulatory approval for the new platform, which companies could use to issue securities that are represented as digital tokens on the blockchain, similar to the way cryptocurrencies work. There's a lot actually wrapped up in that. That first line there, the NYSE said it would seek regulatory approval. Now, let me ask you one small question. Does the International Commodities Exchange, the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, what is it, ICE? What is it?
Yeah, Intercontinental Exchange.
Intercontinental Exchange. Do you believe that the Intercontinental Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange would launch a 24/7 securities marketplace that allows the trading of tokenized stocks and bonds without regulatory approval, or without the idea that they're gonna get regulatory approval? The timelines don't add up here. It's like they didn't get the memo that the market structure bill got pushed out 2 weeks. And they're like, guys, we got to go. The press release was scheduled for Tuesday, the 20th at 9 a.m. Eastern. It went out. Sorry, guys. We're going to go ahead and launch the marketplace, and we'll get to that market structure bill as soon as Armstrong gets back from Davos.
Well, yeah, and how about there's like there's the hard memo, and there's the soft memo, because just to remind us and everyone listening that the advisors, the strategic advisors of companies, if you look at, say, the board, for example, of Meta, or the board at Google, or the board at, you pick your favorite big company, it's worth checking to see who the officers are on the board, what their backgrounds are, and what their relationship is to the company. How many shares are they vested? Were they former employees? Do they have any familial or by marriage relationships to anybody who's involved in the company or in the government? It's just something you should look at sometimes when you're doing your due diligence before you invest in something, which of course no one does anymore, because investing in something is just hitting a button on your phone to buy a tokenized version of whatever, which is as easy as buying V-Bucks for my kids so they can get a skin in Fortnite. But I digress. But who is that interesting person? Who's the strategic advisor? Well, the New York Stock Exchange has aligned themselves, Intercontinental Exchange has aligned themselves with Polymarket. They've invested $2 billion in Polymarket. We know that CNN and others have aligned themselves with Kalshi. Really, the two games in town, your Coke and your Pepsi, and I don't know who's who yet, but it's a Polymarket or Kalshi. Donald Trump Jr., the namesake son of the current American president, is a strategic advisor for both Polymarket and Kalshi. So to think that
good
there's
strategy.
any scenario, I wonder if Saylor's got him on his board too. Speaking of strategy, but it just seems like when you can put out an article that just says pending regulatory approval, I think you kind of sort of already know the guy who knows the guy who knows the guy. That's why I see that stuff. 20th of January, Tuesday morning, boom, it hits. This stuff's been in the works for months, if not even since the Biden administration. It could be years. They've been waiting on this.
It is crazy that's exactly right. Like, talk about the pent up. It's not like they just built this thing overnight. They didn't vibe code it over the MLK weekend. You know,
that would actually be a really cool note at the bottom of that article, though. I'd be like, oh, damn, they're for real now. Oh, my God. It's too many. It's too rigged. I mean, in some ways, it's like it's almost too rigged to be rigged. That's a phrase I think we should coin on the show. When something is so corrupt that it can't be because it's so publicly rigged. I mean, how come no one says any of these things? The New York Stock Exchange is in the pocket of the current administration.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't
God
think people
forbid
are
you would say
making
that, but that seems insane to me that no one's even.
It's going to definitely
their hand.
be the new ICE conspiracy theory. We started it here. Sorry, NYSE. I don't know what to make of it other than I just know that this week is going to be crazy. I thought about it over the weekend. I'm still on my digital detox. Haven't been on Instagram in now 20 days. And so I'm really being very purposeful about the news outlets that I'm seeking, and in fact have been contributing to the news maybe more than I've been reading and consuming, with the latest in the financial brand from my guy, senior editor Steve, I believe it's Steve Cochillo, senior editor at the Financial Brand. I did an interview last week talking about the intersection of AI and the blockchain. And, you know, my favorite quote from the article is, "AI is already changing financial markets, and this influence will grow," predicts Toner, "but the impact of the blockchain is on the cusp of its moment." And I really feel very strongly that I'm showing up, you know, in Las Vegas at the Financial Brand Forum in April as one of the only financial brand marketers who is looking at this from a pure policy perspective. I've tracked every movement of the SEC, every piece of what the new Clarity Act is going to mean for companies to, as the Wall Street Journal says, issue ownership and stocks as tokenized securities on the blockchain, and what that's going to mean for disclosure and being able to share all that news and information that you were saying is going to be needed for due diligence. And you laugh at, nobody does that anymore. Well, no, nobody does that anymore, because my AI agent is going to be doing my due diligence for me when I tell it the types of companies that I'm interested in, or the types of Kalshi bets that I'm interested in, or which sports teams I like, or how much I'm willing to wager on the Super Bowl versus an F1 race. Just generally speaking, what is my investment strategy? What is my risk tolerance? All those questions that your typical Fidelity K advisors would ask you about your risk tolerance. Well, that now becomes truly personalized when your AI agent can go do its due diligence on tokenized stocks and bonds and other securities and other bets and anything and everything you ever want to create a marketplace for. You can make it an investment strategy, and your AI can rebalance your portfolio every night. You can likely earn yield, lend it out, be the bank. I mean, this is the world that retail banks, your mom and pop community banks who are lobbying through the ABA to, don't let this happen. Don't let this bill go through, because they're scared, because they don't understand it. And I look at that and say, there is a massive, massive educational opportunity inside of these financial institutions who do have a stronghold. They do have the centralized power right now. It's very hard to go walk into your bank and, you know, tell them, I want to be able to buy Bitcoin. Well, we don't offer that yet. You know, that's the solution that they have right now, or whatever the solution may be. I want to use my own Bitcoin, but I want my credit union to custody it for me, and I'll borrow against it for my own home equity loan, right? Those are new and unique uses of blockchain technology. I went down the path there of what AI is going to enable, you know, individual retail buyers to do. And I'm excited to blow people's minds at the Financial Brand Forum in April and bring all these use cases to life. And I've got one magic trick that I've been thinking through with the proof of attendance protocol, and obviously QR codes, and during the pandemic and just the proliferation of that camera-based technology, when it can be used to prove that you are physically somewhere in real life, could have huge implications for banks and financial institutions or brands of any kind, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and also just to comment on that is the dusting off of the old magic book for the new magic trick is now even more ever present, because when we're looking at major banks and their relationship to regional banks, like, I don't know what the categories you call institutional global banks versus regional banks, is that now there is this burgeoning class of the retail investor as a retail bank, as some tier below local or regional and below the top, which is the global. And that there's going to perhaps even be, I think your suggestion of this kind of conflation of the two, that the retail investors like you and I and our listeners are people who just are citizens of the United States, and there are these local banks that we sometimes frequent. But if you can combine the two efforts, like a staking of some kind of cryptocurrency, and now staking of some kind of cryptocurrency doesn't just mean Bitcoin or Ethereum or Solana, which I would call the big three based on the narrative that you hear being thrown around. Now you're saying, well, I happen to have a stock portfolio, but it's tokenized stock. So I can stake Apple shares the same way I can stake Ethereum. I can be my own bank with anything of value that is on a blockchain. So now you're taking these gloves off because it existed, but it was so nuanced and niche, right? Now you're saying, oh, well, now if we take everything that you own as a person in this world, and that can be staked as collateral, literally, like I could take my Picasso. We talk about all the Sotheby's things and these crazy art houses. You could still go find someone who would say, okay, yeah, I'll hold this for you and give you $1 million. You better come back. Otherwise I'm going to sell it. Right. Well, there's just that now at the micro level. When is Nextdoor? When is neighborhoodies.com? When is the Facebook local marketplace just going to wake up and say, God, there's a guy who's my neighbor who needs to buy a new lawnmower. And he just needs a small loan. And I happen to know him because he's in my little graph on my whatever. And I can just hit a button and send him $500 because then he agrees to my smart contract to pay back on some interval and I get interest. And then whoever, if I'm not being the custodian, my regional bank is, and everyone's being made whole. So there's a lot of same stuff, just now, again, this different version of the narrative emerging because grand press releases are coming out and paving the way saying, well, if the New York Stock Exchange says it's good, then it must be good for all of us. Even though we've been saying it for 3 years on the show, and the rhetoric has been, it's not good for you,
right?
Including the banks. And now suddenly they're just flipping the whole switch.
I can't wait to hear what Jamie Dimon has to say coming out of Davos. But to pull a thread all the way around, and then we can start to make some 2026 predictions here. But the examples that you just gave and walking through what it means to stake something or to collateralize your assets, you described it so casually, but that it's a very simple in principle, and it's been, obfuscated by the banks of how it works. Somebody has to back your mortgage. There are private lenders inside of the bank whose names get written into the mortgage as the financial backers. You may not know these people, but they've got a lot of money in their account and they're staking it in hopes and promise in return for rewards. Yield, if you will. So yes, these new magic tricks, I think this is where the education around the way products work inside of banks, the way lending works, the way credit cards work, the way savings accounts works, the way what you're describing of like small business lending kind of meets, crowdfunding meets, this is where social score and all of that comes into play. You mentioned Facebook, but the regulation is going to allow for that kind of future use or new uses of the technology. And to pull one thing all the way around of course, Brian Armstrong is out there functioning as this sort of regulatory mascot of like, this is what the US is doing. And I do truly believe that that's what's about to take place. But if the US is going to steal the narrative around regulating digital assets and creating a what did it say, a compliance regime or a regulatory regime.
They use the word regime, which is also interesting.
That tells you it is a war of who's going to own this. So who sticks their head up and says you might need a chief geopolitical officer, none other than Nick Clegg, who we like to cover here on the show, who was this policy guy under Zuckerberg back in the day. He's flown back over to the UK and is now talking about how companies are going to need chief geopolitical officers. And I truly believe there it is, sticking his neck out, because now there's going to be a direct clash of how these the banking systems will not work. You will not be able to transact in a lot of these ways that we're describing here in the US that are going to be allowed now in the EU. And guess what's going to happen? There's going to be so much pent-up demand. These British guys are going to be pissed that they're not able to continue to save in this way. There's going to need to be a global meeting for folks to hash this out.
And they might need to meet in a neutral country. I don't know, like Switzerland. And something else, too, that maybe we should just highlight is that we always like to joke about these, what's old is new, which is another way of doing, dusting off the old magic book and making a new magic trick over it. But the idea of the 24/7 stock exchange with tokenized assets is also a little disingenuous in the way that it's portraying itself, because ever since black box algorithms were allowed to run against our stock market, it meant that people could write programs that would go out and look at the prices of stocks after hours and buy and sell and do great work at triaging and, buying and selling in different waves based on how international markets are moving. So we didn't 20 years ago or 30 years ago, whenever that first started, refer to that as a tokenized asset. It was just a black box algorithm that bought and sold shares. And it was on when you were sleeping, and it did things with an if and then, very simple coupling union logic. Well, fast forward to today, and now that little if-then union logic is been amped up under the umbrella of AI and can actually do thinking. To bring it back to what you were saying with my Fidelity planner, my 401k, and I'm saying, hey, my risk tolerance isn't me telling you a number between 1 and 10 when you hit me in the knee with a little hammer. It's actually something much more specific because of the kinds of assets and the kinds of time of year and how I move and where my flows come in and go out and how liquid can I get, and all the things that we all know are happening that aren't just, I have a tolerance of 6, a tolerance of 8 over here, and a whatever. And so it's basically amping up and rebranding something that we've always done, but for this modern world where everyone's expectation is now, I pull a device out of my pocket and I can make a banking decision in the immediate that will likely result in actual fiat cash showing up in a real institutional or regional bank account, which I can then hit buttons on this ATM machine or walk in if it's open, and then cash will fly out of it. And that kind of new autonomy is, I think, also it's written in between the lines a little of what we see going back and forth in the ping pong arguments between the American Banking Association, regional banks, companies trying to push new decentralized financial products. Everyone is still real sensitive about losing what they think of as their primary foothold, if you will. Like, everyone knows they can't dig their heels and they're still getting pushed and they're sliding like in a kung fu movie. But there's going to be some point where they want to plant one of those feet and hold. And I don't think we're there yet across any of the boards. I think everyone's still playing the tug of war game, and we're going to see what comes out of Davos. I thought that Trump would talk today. I think he's talking tomorrow. So for next week, we can have more information about Diamond and him. But I feel like we're going to see a pretty interesting and perhaps even oversized flow of new regulation, of new law, of new interest in the financial worlds coming out of this meeting. This might be one of the biggest Davoses we've had, in a decade, to be honest.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's right. Yeah, in terms of where things go in 2026, I think this week will be very formative to the narrative. I think everyone is trying to get that position of where some of these final details are going to land. And, I was thinking, you talked about the instantaneous network of blockchains, or transferring money, making a banking decision on your phone. And I just feel really close to the value of what blockchain and self-custody brings, because I did just set up my Ledger Flex here in the first couple weeks in January, moving all my old hardware and hot wallets from MetaMask and Phantom and all these other wallets, and I moved everything over to my Ledger hardware wallet and consolidated. And I was moving, big sums of money and small sums of money, and it cost me $1.50, in fees, pennies on the dollar, and it happened within minutes. The money moved into whichever account I was sending it to, and there was no intermediary. And I think about my monologue earlier about the education. I know I've covered this about the importance of self-custody and what that means from a banking perspective. And it's almost why on my other examples of retail banks, trying to think through how they're going to work with their customers to do these things, I do believe, especially even going through this just in the past recent, it's recent as a few days ago, transferring these onto a hardware wallet, most people, I believe, are not going to trust themselves or feel comfortable with the technology to be their own custody of their keys.
And that's a really important point. The internet of behaviors. That while you and I are gleeful, most everyone else that I talk to about it is very nervous and likes the idea there's a large building made of cement and bricks and wood with fire sprinklers and all the things in vaults that they can, quote, count on that security. But that internet of behaviors is one I think everyone gets past by the end of the decade. one of my predictions for this year is that my mother will actually be someone who purchases some amount of cryptocurrency because of her use and the marketing to her from, say, a Venmo or her bank or PayPal, or gets exposure in her Fidelity 401k.
Some
That,
kind
to
of
me, will
USDC transaction.
that'll be a bellwether, is when she mentions to me stablecoin or crypto, or, oh, it's so great. Now when I go to the bank, I just put money in the stablecoin account. So now my grandchildren can go get it for their college money or whatever. There's going to be something where she's going to say a word, my prediction this year, that's going to blow my mind. That's how I'm going to know that we've finally arrived. Now, she may not be
Nice.
running around with her own, thumb drive, but just knowing that what she's doing is, quote, on the blockchain, I think will be something that we'll find a lot of our more senior citizens will start to become aware of. Not
Yeah,
it's going to happen
signals.
overnight, but signals, yeah.
Yeah, that the UX, will sort of take over, and the crypto lingo and tech will fade to the background. I think that's a good prediction for 2026. I think it's interesting to me that the financial narrative taking Davos, taking these first couple of weeks more than the AI. I mean, I think NVIDIA is going to be there, but I feel like it's the conflating of these two things, this intersection of the AI and blockchain, that I think is helping to drive the narrative. Because when you have all these chips and you're putting tokens in them in the way that an AI works and an LLM works, you're tokenizing the data. There's a lot of overlap there with the tokenization of real world assets. And the blockchain, the provenance and authenticity that you're going to need when generative AI is creating anything. You're going to need a truth layer. So that's my big one, is that narrative continues to play out in 2026. And then I think it's going to look a lot like compliance and regulatory regime, because the U.S., in owning the financial layer, in owning the battlefield of the market and the exchange, will in essence own the truth layer. Final
thoughts to leave everyone with. We talked about that geopolitical appointee, Clegg, who was really probably at least partially instrumental in the creation of Truth Social, because when he made the decision to ban Donald Trump from Facebook and Meta, and then there was subsequent, I think, muting off of Twitter at the time. Well, what did that do? It just caused that family to make their own social network, right? So he, while turning off someone, of course, turned on a whole lot more people. And when you look at the coalitions of groups that he worked with, when you talk Zuckerberg, who did he call? He called the head of JP Morgan Chase's, some guy named Derek Chollet, their Center for Geopolitics. He called Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. He called up Condoleezza Rice, Tony Blair, former UK Prime Minister, all these people who are thinkers, geopolitical leaders, but people who are often regarded as thinkers for these little boards, coalitions. You pick the name, a consortium of individuals who are supposed to be coming up with writing edicts or ideas for new legislation and regulation. I thought it was fascinating. Leave the audience with this. The rebuilding of Gaza, the Gaza Peace Board, an invitation has been extended to Vladimir Putin to join the board for rebuilding Gaza and solving the Israel-Gaza conflict. Now, if you just think about that for a second, he's not being invited to the Greenland board. Let's just be clear. He's probably not going to be invited to the Ukraine board, but we'll invite you to Gaza and to Israel. And seeing players involved in one theater of war, whether on land in real life or in the metaverse, but then being allowed to cross over, to jump games, to jump to the different metaverse for financial or influence, if it's the real world, is going to start to become so muddy and so confusing. It will, I think, present a lot of new opportunities, hopefully, to bring awareness for these global things that we can kind of all maybe come together to move certain things forward in a way we haven't before. I like to think optimistically about that, and that it's not just 100% nonsense designed to appease dictators. That's my hope for this year, is that we can resolve some of the craziness that we've instantiated in the last 4 or 5.
Well said, sir. I will look forward to all the headlines this week, and we will do it again right here this time, same place next week. Let's do it again. Peace out.
See you then.